We're going to talk a little bit about outlining, specifically as it relates to creative writing. In this video, we're going to look at some examples from my own work. Then we're going to look at and talk about different approaches to outlining that work for various authors and what the advantages of each one is. And before the end of the video, I'm going to share a resource of a site that has several templates that can be used for outlining, as well as some other checklists that may be useful to a writer that's maybe getting started, figuring out how to publish, looking for your voice, or maybe just looking for the method that works best for you. There are a couple things we need to talk about before we even get into outlining when it comes to style. There are two basic schools of thought when it comes to writing in terms of the planning and organization phase, I guess what you might call the pre-writing phase. Authors kind of break down into pantsers and plotters. So if you're pantsing a story, that means flying by the seat of your pants. And that phrase means that you're just kind of making it up as you go. So it would be sort of the opposite of outlining. You may have the title, you may have an idea what the story is about, but you just go with it and write it. Your first draft just comes straight out of your head. Now, plotting is sort of the opposite of that. It's in some form you are planning out your story, and that outlining can take many different forms. I used to try to, maybe I'm not the best person to be doing this video because I lean more towards pantsing, but I do use outlining. Over the years, especially when I first started, I used it a lot, but I found with my style, even after I made an outline, I tended to drift away from it pretty quickly. So it would be a good guideline and I would use pieces of it, but very often as I was writing the story, I end up going in different directions. There's nothing wrong with that, especially if the outline serves to get you started. As I've gone on, I've sort of blended different styles of outlining into what I do now, which sometimes is pretty close to pantsing. Other times I outline more completely. The one story that I've outlined the most is the Dead Song Legend. It's going to be a 12-book series, and I'm currently working on book 7. The first 6 have been published. That story is fairly well outlined. I can tell you which characters are dying at different places in the book. I know what the major plot points of each of the novels that are coming up are. Over time, though, that outline has become more of what we would call a story Bible. And that's the idea of as I add new details, new characters, new towns, things like that, those things are added into what used to be the outline and is now just a list of everything that's kind of already happened. So as I get into later books, I don't forget who people are, where they are, what's gone on before. So it is pretty heavily outlined, but now it's more of that story Bible. There's maps in it and all sorts of things. But I am going to share a few of the outlines that I've used recently, and then we'll talk more generally about styles of outlining that may be useful to you. All right, here we have my penciled out outline of a book that's called Rise Again. This is the book that I wrote. It's not completed yet, but I wrote it live on Twitch. So each day in November for the NaNoWriMo writing challenge, I sat down and wrote another 2,000 or 2,500 words on the novel each day. Those videos are rolling off of Twitch as of the time I'm recording this, but they still exist on YouTube if you want to go to my YouTube channel. Again, you're watching me write a novel for day after day for about 20 days. So this was the initial outline, and it evolved more detailed at the beginning and less later on as I didn't know exactly where the story was going. So if we look here, you can see at the very beginning of this that it's basically just writing out the first lines of the story. So there's something that would be called sort of a complete outline where you are doing a lot of detailed work in it, and then it sort of broke down into more of a skeletal outline as it went along. We'll talk about the different types in a moment. But this one began, all 3 days I followed him through the wilderness. I swore he was human. He was more than lost. He seemed to be a man so below ordinary, so unprepared for the world as it is, that he appeared to have been born into it the morning I saw him half a day's walk from the village. Born fully grown, not just an outsider or a lost hunter. He was lost in his own skin. All right. Now, a lot of that poetic language I may end up putting back into the story, but I went simpler when I actually wrote the story. In the actual story, as it is now, this is still first draft and incomplete, Rise Again. When I began actually composing it, I started off, I thought he was human the entire time I followed him through the wilderness. I took out the 3 days because part of the surprise in this first chapter is that we don't know how long they're going to be followed and why he poses a danger. I would not have followed him at all, except he passed within less than half a day's journey from our village, and he was so strange. Not strange in a way that gave me any clue to his true nature, but still very, very strange. He was less than ordinary. As I watched him with my bow at the ready, he tripped over a root in plain sight, got up, tripped over the next root on the same tree. So we kind of get a little bit more of a of an action going there, and I don't quite wax as poetic as we go along. So I'm not sure which one's the better approach, but that's what we had going on. Up at the top there, you can see the words suspicion, irritation, and fear. Those are mood words in this particular novel. I have the character. I have the character that's being followed, not the narrator. So each chapter has a different narrator, and they speak about the character that they're watching from their own point of view. So in that case, I need each chapter to sound different because it's a different person talking. So I kind of pick out sort of the moods to guide what's going to happen next in the story. Now, as the story goes on, we move from sort of in the outline, we move from more of the narrative down to more note taking, sort of bullet points. Scout with a question mark, red coat, brighter than blood. Woven pants, not made of skin, not holding up, footwear I could not identify, an other, but what other? More important, why was he scouting us? Pale, covered in bites, all that sort of thing. So those sort of details describe the person from the point of view of the person following him, and then we get into that later on. As you can see here, this is later in the outline. Vindictive, dangerous are some of the mood terms up here above chapter 5. You can see I'm sort of I've broken it down to basically character names and lesser details, so it's much less detailed in the later chapters because at that point I'm kind of making it up as I go. Here we're getting closer to how I kind of do things now, where sometimes I'm just taking a few notes and I'm not truly outlining at all. This is a post-it note from a full novel called Room 138 that I co-wrote with Armand Rosamelia. That novel is a sci-fi time travel novel that's going to come out in some point in 2021. Here you can see we have the character names: Hank Smith, a few details, Savannah and a blank, Alice died in 1926. We have Terry. We have a couple years. We have Mr. Train. We have clues and things like that. So in that sense, this is not detailed at all. It's just basically a few character details listed off for a novel. Once I was editing, I had to take a little more care with what we did with the story. But this was sort of my starting outline as we were working together. Then we get a little closer to what I'm doing now, especially when I write a short story on Twitch. Very often I'll only write down character names. I may write down a couple street names, things like that. If I were writing the story just by myself with no one watching, pretty much I would just stop when I needed a character name. I'd go look up what I needed to find, come back and continue writing. But now I sort of take these little notes to keep me going, so when I look down for the next character name, I don't have to just make it up as I go or try to figure it out just sitting there in silence. These characters go with a crime fiction short story that I'm in the middle of writing now. Now let's take a moment to look at a few different types of outlines that may be useful to you. The first would be a synopsis outline. Typically, this type of outline is about 1 to 2 pages of bullet points. You can do full sentences, but very often you're breaking it apart into smaller pieces so it's easier to see. In these 2 pages of bullet points, you would hit all the major action points, what's happening first, second, third, so forth. You broadly define the beginning, middle, and end of the story, and spells out the characters, plot points, twists, climax, and resolution of the story. So essentially, some people would describe this as being the back of the book, but that's not a good description because you don't give away everything that's going to happen in the book on the back of the book. This is more along the lines of if you were sending it to a publisher, you might tell them this level of detail so they could decide if they wanted the book or not. But basically, you're telling yourself the whole story in simple bullet points, including all the characters and everything, from beginning to end in about a couple pages. Next, we have the in-depth outline. This is a little closer to what I was doing at the beginning of that Rise Again novel outline. But of course, I didn't maintain that because I was kind of doing a hybrid of a few different things. But the in-depth outline includes summaries of every chapter. In addition to every chapter, you can have summaries of every scene in every chapter. Then you can go, it can be thousands of words long. It takes a longer time, but includes all the details of the story once you're finished. So it may take you a long time to complete this outline, but essentially you're sort of doing a mini version of the novel, and then you'll have it ready at the end. It basically spells out everything for you. Some people don't want that level of detail. Other people swear by this type of outline. Snowflake method. Now, real quick, none of these are things that I'm making up. So these aren't things that I just came up with myself. You can look online and find several different places where people talk about this. But the snowflake method or the snowflake outline, there's several steps to it, and I'll show you an example when we get to the website that has templates. But essentially, you're kind of building each thing on the next. So you start with a 1-sentence summary of the story. Just say what the story is in 1 sentence. Second, you build that sentence into a paragraph explaining the story. Third, you describe each character in the story. Next, you create scenes and storylines for each of those characters, and you continue to define the beginning, middle, and end of the story by expanding on what you created before. So there's a template I'll show you that has this broken down into about 10 steps. But this is basically the idea, starting from the 1-sentence summary and then building out your entire story and all your characters. Bookend outline is a little bit more of a pantser type outline. With a bookend, you define the beginning and end in detail. So what's happening to start the story and how is the story going to end. You describe all the characters from the story in detail, but then you leave the middle open to make up as you go. So this may not be an ideal outline for somebody who's having trouble figuring out what the middle is, but someone who likes to pants their writing but still kind of wants to have a structure, then the bookend outline may be perfect for you. Skeletal outline is both formal but then pretty easy to put together. So it typically breaks down this way, and these are sort of the steps of the action within a story. You start out with your setting and background, kind of not all the stuff you wouldn't necessarily want to explain at the beginning, but kind of frame up your story so that people will know where it's taking place and that kind of thing, and then you figure out where to share those details. Next, you figure out your inciting incident, what sets off the action of the story, the rising action, how does the conflict grow, the climax, the falling action after the climax, and then the resolution of the story. Under each of these, you would do maybe 3-4 little dashes or bullet points about each one, and then you kind of have a basic framework for your story. This is an article by Robbie Blair that was on Lit Reactor in 2014. Many of the things that he shares in here are similar to some of the outlines I'm going to share with you, and then there's a few others that he didn't have. But again, most everything I'm telling you about exists out there in several places in several formats, so you can find resources everywhere. I liked his discussion of the skeletal outline, so I wanted to share it here. So his setting number one he calls exposition. So here are the examples he gives, and you can see he has about three with each one. So his exposition is the story takes place in a village named Hillside. We are introduced to Jack, who is a paladin. We are introduced to Jill, who is a thief. The inciting incident, Jack catches Jill stealing a crown. While he's arresting her, goblins sneak into the village and light buildings on fire. The rising action, Jack and Jill both decide they must climb the hill to get the magical pail of endless water. On the way up the hill, J and J encounter and fight goblins. At the top of the hill, J and J find that a dark priest named Ravamag has been controlling the goblins. The climax, Jack and Jill fight Ravamag. Jack is flung from the hill by Ravamag. In anger, Jill stabs Ravamag and retrieves the pail of endless water that then leaps down the hill. Falling action, falling. Very cute. And then finally resolution, flash forward to a time when Jack is discovered still healthy. Jack and Jill have saved the town from the fire and Ravamag. Jack and Jill are celebrated by the people. Jack lets Jill go even though she stole the crown. So that would sort of be the outline of, I guess, this retelling of a fairy tale. Another interesting way to outline is called the visual map outline, and you can do this just about any way you want, and especially if you're artistic in nature, this may be a type of outlining that appeals to that side of your brain. You take the setting, ideas, and characters, and they all get their own boxes anywhere on the page. Now, of course, you can use any shape you want, but just for simplicity, we'll call them all boxes. But again, if you want to draw a flower around one, if you want to create a castle around one, whatever you want to do. But the boxes go just around your page, and each one has a setting, an idea, or a character inside that box. Details, usually basic details about each character, place, or thing, go inside the box or just around the outside. So any basic details that don't need a whole lot of explaining, such as hair color, maybe the names of their parents, whatever the detail is, include that in and around the box. Then you ask questions. How and why questions are the best because they usually draw out the most information. You draw a line from the box being questioned and create a new box for the answer. So let's say it's the villain. You have the villain's name and a few details about the villain. All right, what is the villain's goal? And it could be we're going to destroy the gate and trap the town in another dimension. And then you're like, okay, why does the villain want to do that? Okay, well, he was wronged by the king and wants to punish his descendants for the crimes that were done against them. Okay, how was he wronged? And then you go into details about that. And each question provides more and more information. You do that for all the different details and settings and kind of exhaust it to where you have this map that you can see that basically spells out the story and the backstories. Then you ask new questions about the answer boxes and map out your whole story that way. Spotlight outline. Again, it mixes some of the styles of some of the other ones. Each chapter gets a few bullet points about what happens, who the characters are, why the details are important, where scenes begin and end, and or the goals of the scene. So the headings for your outline would be Chapter 1, Chapter 2, Chapter 3, Chapter 4. I've also seen this called a flashlight outline, but you get the idea. You might only have 3 or 4 lines per chapter. So it may be as simple as saying where the scene starts, what's happening in the scene, and where the scene ends. Where the scene starts and ends can be location, but it can also be the mood. The scene starts one way and then ends in a fight. The scene begins with the characters trying to convince each other of something. The characters reverse their positions by the end of the scene. Those kind of things. But a lot of times it's just action points that sort of remind you of what needs to happen in that scene. There might be 9 or 10 lines for more complex chapters or scenes. So again, a spotlight outline, you don't have to put a lot of detail, but if there's a lot of complexity, if there's multiple locations, then you can put those down. And sometimes you can look at that and it can help you decide, okay, there's too much going on in this chapter. This will actually need to be 2 chapters, and then you got to figure out where the starts and ends are there. Next, we have the free flow outline, and a lot of times this is more like just kind of pantsing it than it is an actual outline, but it's sort of pantsing an outline, I guess you'd say. This may be less like an outline and more like stream of consciousness free writing. Just write down the details about the story as they come to you. It doesn't have to be in order at this point. You can fixate on one character and talk about them for a while, but then move on to the other ideas and kind of flesh those out just as quickly as you can write. Don't slow down. Don't interrupt yourself. You write about characters, plot details, setting, and everything else you can think of about the story. Then you organize the ideas later. Next, we have a note card outline. Again, you get a big stack of note cards, just like you may have done with reports in school. You write one detail per card and no more. I've done this before, and I've taken because there wasn't a lot of information on every card, I've taken the index cards and cut them in half. So that I basically have a bunch of half index cards, stack them up. I have twice as many, and then I don't feel like I'm wasting any space. But the idea is one card, one idea. Whether it's one detail about a character, whether it's one plot detail, whether it's one action. Keep going until everything you need to know about the story has a card. You can do this over multiple days. You can add cards in later. Both the important details and the trivial details. So a battle takes place at this point, you write that on the card. This character wears a red jacket, write it on the card. Sort the cards into the order you want to tell the story. When do actions occur? In what order? When are characters introduced? When are details about them revealed? So it could be that this character with a mysterious past and a dark secret is introduced up here in chapters 1, 2, or 3, but the dark secret about them may be introduced in the middle or end. The fact that they have a brother that's after them could be introduced a couple chapters after we find out that there's a dark secret, that kind of thing. So even the details about the characters can be sorted into where they come in the story, and it can help you organize your thoughts into the actual plotting of the story. Now, we've looked at several different types of outlines. If you go to evernote.com/blog/12-creative-writing-templates/ that is a site that has several templates that I know a number of authors have used, and they can be used for a number of the outlines that we've introduced here. This is the Evernote site, and it's 12 creative writing templates for writing your novel. Forrest Dillon Bryant created this page in October of 2017. Here you can see an example of a outline that just shows setting, main character, and antagonist. This is maybe sort of a type of skeleton outline. And you can see the story premise worksheet. So you can see more detail, inciting incident and conflict, details about the antagonist, details about the main character, and setting. So that's how that can be fleshed out. You can also, there's a 3-act plotting template. So you have Act 1, the beginning, opening scene, setup, inciting incident, call to action. Act 2, Part 1, the middle. You have the choice. How does the protagonist decide to deal with the problem? What are the stakes? Rising action, mounting problem. Troubles mount as conflict kicks into high gear. What keeps the protagonist going? And then midpoint reversal, a surprise event that wrecks the plan and raises the stakes, often after a temporary triumph. Act 2, Part 2, after the reversal. There is a fallout from the midpoint, continuing the conflict as problems pile up. Disaster, a moment when everything goes wrong and the goal appears impossible to achieve. Then you get turning point, new ideas or fresh inspiration, offer hope and set the story's final act. Then Act 3 is the resolution, plan, and resolve. All the pieces are moved into place for the finale, subplots tied together and stakes reach a peak. Climax, the protagonist comes face to face with the antagonist or the main obstacle and is victorious or fails. And then denouement. After the climax, the protagonist and or world have changed. A final scene provides closure to the story, and that can be for happy endings or unhappy endings. Next, we have the story beats template, and I know a lot of people who like this one. So the beats and the scene idea, an opening image, a visual or scene that sets the tone for the story and introduces the protagonist. The theme stated, a scene that sets up or teases the message or essential truth of your story. Set up, scenes that introduce the world and supporting characters. And you got catalyst, debate, break into Act 2, B story. B story, the protagonist learns about the theme, usually with the aid of a mentor, friend, or love interest. Dark Night of the Soul is number 12. In the aftermath of the crisis, the hero hits rock bottom emotionally and everything falls apart. So there we go. Looking at other templates, there's Snowflake Method Checklist. So this is what we talked about earlier with the Snowflake Method. Step 1, one sentence synopsis. Expand your synopsis for full paragraph. Create summary sheet of major characters. Expand your one paragraph synopsis into multiple paragraphs. Write one page retelling the story about each character's from each character's point of view. Expand each paragraph from your main synopsis to a full page. Expand your character sheets as much as you can. Develop a list or a spreadsheet of all the scenes needed to tell your story. Write a description of each scene. And then number 10, use all the above to write the first draft of your novel. So that's that Snowflake Method expands out and involves a lot of detail. So story timeline tracker. In this template, you have the days, date, day of the week, morning, afternoon, evening. And from that way, you can kind of keep track of what's going on. So if you have multiple things, multiple storylines, multiple things going on, this can actually help you kind of keep everything in order. And so the timelines of each plot and subplot stay in place. All right, chapter outline. We talked about this earlier. Chapter 1, 2, 3, 4. And then just a checklist of 3 things for each chapter. You have character master sheet. So you can use an image. You don't have to. You can use a name, age, notes, and then you can fill it out with as much detail as you need to. He gives an example here of a character named Richard. Character profile worksheet. You got height, body weight, hair, eyes, facial description. Now again, speech, behavior, background. You fill all this out, but you don't necessarily need to put every detail in the story. So it's not an information dump of all the information here, but having it in front of you can allow you to stay consistent with the characters, and then new details can be added. There's a character biography template, which is similar to the others that we just saw. World building questionnaire, I kind of like this one. Place, where is the story located? Describe the climate. How do people typically get around? The people, where do they live? How healthy is the economy? How diverse is the population? What is family life like? Then culture, what is the history of the place? How do people dress? What holidays are important and why? What are the popular forms of entertainment and so forth? So if you're kind of trying to figure out how your world works in your fantasy story, then that template can help a great deal. The story dashboard note, you kind of have your title and your genre and word count, and then some details of when you're starting and completing different things. And then there's one for self-publishing as well. Here you can see the title, cover blurb, copy editing, proofreading, cover design, interior, formatting for ebook, proofs, formatting your proofs, setting the price, publishing. So if you're self-publishing your book, this is a checklist of the things that you might need to get done in order to do that. So be sure to check that out and pull the templates that work best for you for the types of outlining that you think will work best for you. And it does help to try different ones. Even if you have one that you're particular to, it doesn't hurt to try a new one, especially if you feel like you're in a rut or if you're trying to accomplish something different with a story. These work for, some of this was geared around novels, but of course these work for short stories as well. A few closing thoughts. No matter what outline you use, don't expect a perfect first draft. So there's no amount of outlining that's going to take out the need for editing and revising. You will have to edit and revise. A professional editor will need to help if you are publishing professionally. Be open to those edits. So if you're self-publishing, you need to find an editor you can hire who will do a professional edit of your work to not only find all the typos, but find holes in your story and plot. If you're going through a publisher and you get your story accepted by somebody, an editor is going to tell you some things that need to be changed. You need to be open to those edits. So it doesn't mean you have to take every edit suggested by every editor. But it is helpful to recognize that we're not perfect, and editors do an important job of fixing things that we don't see or helping us make our story better without actually taking anything away from our voice or the way that we plot. But you need to trust yourself to write the first draft. So I don't want anyone to get caught in a outline paralysis where you just spend all your time planning the story and don't actually write it. So at some point, once you have your details down the way you want with the type of outline you want, you need to sit down and draft it out. It won't be perfect, like we said at the beginning of this slide, but you have to trust yourself to write it, because until you write it, you can't fix it. And don't be afraid to move, of course, from outlining to drafting, which I just said there. So at some point, you don't want to be frozen with fear. You want to move on and actually write it. I hope all these details about outlining have been helpful. And again, look for those templates. If you don't like those, there are plenty more online, and you can just search for writing templates and find some that you think work best for you.